Well, welcome everybody. This is another Thursday morning and an exciting adventure into the inner mind today. We have with us as our guest, Dr. David Nehring, and he's the executive director of the Bethesda Christian Counseling. And we're going to be speaking with him today about beliefs, belief systems, and how we use them or don't use them. But first, to get started, I should say that the block that you see that says David, that's him. But for some reason, but for some reason, the internet is not cooperating with him today. It doesn't like him today. So the camera is not really working well. So we're going to have to go with what we have, and that's David Incognito. And maybe we'll change his name to David Incognito. But we're gonna roll with it and try to have some fun and learn a few things. And I always like to remind people at the top of this program that this is really an interactive experience. You know, it happens when you have ideas that you share, you have questions that you pose to the group or to our guest. It's all about you, really, you know, and you can get out of it as much as you put into it. You know, a lot of times we don't really have a chance to say, well, this is bothering me, or this is something I don't get, or this doesn't seem like something I could use, or here's something that I found works for me. And sometimes we think, well, what we think doesn't make a difference. But then I beg to differ with that and say that, you know, all of us will always be smarter than any one of us. So I always like to get people to be involved in the process, to share the kinds of things that they are feeling, and that they feel that they know. And today we're going to be talking about what you believe, you know, your belief system, and kind of get under the hood of that. And we're fortunate to have David Nehring, the executive director of the Bethesda Christian Counseling. I guess it's a group, or you guys, or is it a company, David?
We're an agency. Yeah, I'm Dr. Dave Nehring. I'm the executive director of Bethesda Christian Counseling. What we are is, I like to call us a Christian counseling practice community. And we have main offices in Orange City and in Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls is our main office, but then we also specialize in rural healthcare. So we have branch locations in Laverne and Woodstock and Mitchell and Sioux Center and elsewhere, Sheldon. You know, these are places where we're trying to get out into the rural communities to deliver mental health care in those contexts. Okay. So we operate specifically from, you know, as within ourselves is we, you know, as a group, we are agreed with one another that we're operating from a Christian worldview. And within that context, we're working with standard of practice, standard of care, empirically validated treatments and interventions and dealing with, you know, what I like to call the turbulence of life. You know, that, you know, life brings problems, life brings pain, and that comes across in emotional ways. And when it gets to be bad enough, well, then it's time for us to have some conversations.
Great. I'd like to have a little background, or for you to share some background with the other guest on this program. Sure. In terms of, like, where did you grow up and how did you get into counseling? How did you move into this field?
Yeah, I've grown up, I've lived in several different places in the United States. I started out life in the Southwest. I then lived in the North Midwest. Then I lived in the East Midwest, and a couple different places there. Then I've lived on the Northeast Seaboard, lived in the far West, back to the Southwest, and then to South Dakota. So I like to say United States is my hometown. Okay. I've got to know the country very well. And that's given me an opportunity to really get to know a lot of the subcultures and even, cultures of people coming from outside. I think when I was in Southern California, I totaled it up once and I'd worked with over 30 different ethnic groups in service delivery when I was there, and when I was in the Southwest, I got to know the couple different Hispanic populations and some Native populations there. The fun part about being in the North Midwest is that I end up working primarily with European-based subcultures where people actually still remember what those subcultures are. So, I mean, in Eastern South Dakota, people really do think of themselves as Norwegian or Dutch or Swedish or Irish or Danish or German, wherever. And in most areas of the United States, yeah, that's gone away a couple generations ago. So I've gotten to know that. As far as getting into the field, I got into psychology when I was going first in undergrad at Anderson College, where I'm looking at what I want to do with my life, and I really wanted to understand what it meant to be human. Okay, what is it all about? What does it mean? Okay, sort of what's it all about, Alfie, right? And so did that. Then did a year at Purdue University doing cognitive psychology, studying thinking, understanding, memory, mind. Okay, what is that? And really had some good learning experiences that helped me understand kind of what's at stake in those conversations. And we may get into that later on, maybe not. Then I was out to Fuller Seminary, where I got a master's in psychology, a master's in theology, and a doctorate in clinical psychology. And then I went to go work for our uncle, Uncle Sam. And there I was in military psychology. I served out at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for my training, and then at Cannon Air Force Base in eastern New Mexico. Okay, got out there, did worked in a just a normal, regular, secular clinic as sort of the token Christian counselor. And yeah, that's me. I'm that guy who does that thing. And then I came to South Dakota, where I've been doing Christian counseling in one form or another ever since then. Specifically, I've been working as a psychologist and then as a clinical director and now executive director at Bethesda Christian Counseling.
Well, that's quite a journey.
A lot of mileage, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of mileage. So it's good to have those kind of different kinds of experiences. I think it gives one a broader platform to stand on. And I'd like to now switch to our subject about beliefs and belief systems. And can you say anything about the role of beliefs in your work or in therapy in general? What is the role of beliefs and belief systems?
Well, let's start with just kind of what a belief is. Okay, a belief is, we could say, is for the purpose of this conversation, we're going to call it a proposition. I believe I can get a pita at Pita Pit. Okay, I believe that if I drive down 229, I'll get home. Okay, I have these ideas about life that correspond to reality, and understanding reality itself is one of those beliefs. What is reality? What do I believe about reality? What is in fact real? What isn't? Okay, and shortly we'll get into what's called self-referential beliefs. Okay, and self-referential beliefs are a different breed of cat. Okay, so let's start out with just the idea of belief, and those beliefs have this affect value loading to it. All right, I want to have a pita. I'd like to get home at night. And I believe that there is or is not a God who looks over me while that's happening. Okay. So I have all these beliefs. Okay. And these beliefs have emotional valence, affect, feelings attached to them. And that leads me to value them in different sorts of ways. Okay. So when I start out in life, my understandings are mostly going to come from my interactions from other people. Okay. I understand my parents are the source of nurture or not. And and I come up with those in my interactions with others, but I can generate those within myself. Okay. And one of our beliefs about beliefs is, do I generate those or do I discover those, or is it both? Okay. So I start out in life, hopefully, theoretically, most often in some sort of family. Okay. And that family has understandings that they conveyed to me as a child. Okay. When that family gets bigger, it becomes an extended family. If it gets even bigger than that, it's called a tribe or ethnic group or culture. All right. So then that introduces our first set of distinctions. What are the various belief systems? So we have cultures, we have ideologies, we have philosophies, we have religions. You could even say you have professions, all of which have their belief systems attached to them. What do I mean by belief system? A belief system is a way of testing beliefs and understandings and have different purposes attached to those. So like if I'm going to, I believe that those, bright things in the sky that don't twinkle are gods. Okay. Or I believe those bright things in the sky that don't twinkle are planets. And so there are ways I go about testing that in relationships, and it depends upon if my purposes are to establish truth value, or if the purpose of that is to, stay in relationship with a group, or if that my purpose is to try to see where I fit in a group, et cetera, et cetera. All of those tell me different things. Okay. So if it's a culture, the way I test things is this a tradition? Is this what we've always done? Is this what we do? And the best expression of culture is language. We use when I sit beside a flat piece of furniture with a top and put things on it, we all in this conversation agree that it's called a table. Okay. Doesn't have to be. Could be called a mesa. Could be a lot of different things. But language is the expression of culture in which we mediate meaning. Okay. We understand what something means and how it's to be valued. Okay. And so that tends to fit within religions. Religions are integrated well with cultures. Okay. So if I go to Japan, the culture there is probably going to introduce me sooner or later to the idea of Shintoism. Okay. If I go to China, might run across some Confucianism. If I go to Saudi Arabia, I'm going to get to know a little bit about Muhammad. Okay. And if you'll notice, most religious systems are distinct from, but connected to a culture. You see that actually in churches. Okay. Roman Catholic, Dutch Reformed, English Lutheran, Scottish Presbyterian. Okay. And so it goes. All right. So, AME Zion. Okay. Is that attached to a cultural way of doing things? You bet. So a lot of these things go together and they create these large webs of coordinating action, attributing meaning, by which we build meaningful connected relationships, and they have their own means of testing that occur within them. So we can have philosophies in which we test things through rationality and reason and logic. Okay. We have empirical philosophies in which we test things through measurement. How do I measure something? Okay. We have ideologies in which we test things according to how does this allow the group to function? What's my place in it? And how do we do whatever the group wants to do? Okay. Do we want to, to even the classes of society? Do we want to have free markets? Do we want to have this or do we have that? And that's what ideologies do. And all of these things are belief systems, okay, that they have different ways of allowing us to test ideas, coordinate action, attribute meaning, find our place, and cultivate identity, okay? Now, the thing is, that is where a lot of beliefs are coming from, but not all of them. So when I was a child, okay, one of the beliefs I had is that all boys had double toes on their feet, okay? Well, why was that? Well, because I had double toes on one foot on my feet and my sister did not. So I concluded that, and children do this, they generate these beliefs that then they go through life and they either test or they don't. And I tested that by looking at other boys' feet and I noticed they didn't have double toes. So it's like, double toes does not go with boyhood. Now, this isn't necessarily anything I talked with anybody about, okay? But there's other beliefs that I would have picked up by talking to other people. And notice how these beliefs have a certain value. In this case, I understood boyhood in that way. And then that leads to value. Oh, yes, as a boy, it's good I have double toes, right? And that accords to really belief systems are those systems in which we have tested that. But the thing is, we can't test everything. I can't test everything in life. So I also, as part of that, when I am part of a belief system, I understand what constitutes an authority, who is to test what, okay? So if I am driving down the road and there's 2 5s on the signs on the side of the road and my speedometer says 72, there are certain people that have the authority to have a question me about that. The ones that have the lights on top of their cars, and they can pull me over and ask me about that. And then there's people who then I can go before and actually answer for that. They're an authority. And they're the ones who are going to determine if their beliefs that I have violated the law in speeding, if that's going to be regarded as true or not, by then assigning me a fine. And those are all beliefs that we process via authorities. And in this day and age, one of our problems is as our clashing belief systems come together, we also attribute authority differentially to different people because we're coming from different belief systems, religions, different belief systems, ideologies, different belief systems, cultures, okay, and so on. And it becomes very difficult for us to coordinate conversations to say, okay, how do we process our understanding of beliefs and who do we appeal to for authorities? And that's why your conversation here is so important. Because in your conversations here, we can have conversations about conversations. We can have conversations about how do we know. We can have conversations about why do I test it this way as opposed to that way, okay? And we can therefore work to build better connections and have some means of developing a culture of relationship that then can subsume cultures of ethnicity and cultures of ideology, et cetera. Okay, that's how I understand belief systems. All right. Now, some of those beliefs come from other kind of transcendent things, and I want to talk about that in just a moment or so. But first, that's kind of my setup. That's my thinking, and I'm coming at this not as a sociologist, not as an anthropologist. I'm not claiming specialized knowledge and skill in sociology and anthropology. I am coming at this as a psychologist who's worked with people at a lot of different places, coming from different places with a specialized knowledge and skill in religion. And I also bring this understanding of my own walk as distinct from that religious training. I have a walk that I walk in life that also informs this conversation. But I just want to build up the basis for the conversation by thinking about it in that way. So that's an awful lot. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's an awful lot, but it's awfully useful as well. Thank you for that. I want to get a little bit under the hood of this, and I'd like also the audience to be involved in this conversation, because I think we can gain something from the things that you all have experienced. And I guess you mentioned a couple of places where people get their belief system from.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious if there's other people in our audience here who have ways that how they think of where they got their belief systems. And we'll get into another area in a moment that you mentioned, testing the belief system. But anyone care to venture to say, you know, where did you get your belief system? How did you form your belief system, or some facet of it? Maybe that's a big question, but some facet of it. Anybody?
Ferris Bueller. Anyone? Right?
Go on, Annie.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
I thought Ferris Bueller was where you got your inspiration, but yeah. So, as someone who questions authority, a lot of it has to do with questioning my own personal experiences based against the authority that is in the moment, whether it's, the expert, the scientist, the politician, the religious figure. I'm constantly testing and querying and thinking about how those resonate with my own personal experiences, and then the greater good and the greater society and their experiences. But yeah, anyway, this is fascinating, and I'll let a couple of other people chime in about where they get their beliefs, but I do have a bunch of questions to throw out later.
Okay, great. Betty, you were going to say something.
I was just going to fill empty space. I'm glad Anne jumped in. I think my first thing I was going to say is rather mundane. They came with me when I was born. I was born into a family where we just went with what we were told was it. And it's taking me all my life to form more of my own belief systems. I'm glad that I am still alive to do that.
Excellent. Anyone else have some way that they can share with us that they realize that their belief systems or system was formed? Anybody else? Well, let's go on then with, keep that in mind, because I think that's a fundamental question. So if you think of something later that you want to say, just let us know. We can try to come back to that if we haven't gone down too far down another rabbit hole.
Can I respond to Annie just a moment?
Yeah, sure.
I like the fact that Annie is questioning authorities and questioning religious authorities, political authorities, ideological authorities. I think it's also wise to question philosophical authorities and scientific authorities, because that's what science is. Okay, that's what philosophy is to be. Is that we are not going to be able to question every single authority. I don't really feel the need to question the authority of the anesthesiologist when I go under surgery. I could do that. Okay. I don't think I'm going to. All right. But there's others who I'm going to, authorities who I am going to question. And so one of those is when I was in that program of cognitive psychology is when we are questioning ourselves, or questioning authorities. One of those authorities we question is me. Is I need to question my own authority. Well, what questions make sense? Well, like for me, with my interest, it's like, well, first of all, let's think about thinking. Okay. And as soon as you get into think about thinking, you're getting into something called self-reference. Okay. And once one gets into self-reference, now you're into the rabbit hole. I like to tell the story when I was talking to one of the other graduate students, and I go up to her and I said, we're studying cognitive psychology, right? Yeah, right. Okay. And in cognitive psychology, we study thinking and memory and learning, right? Yeah, right. Okay. So what we're doing is we're thinking about thinking, right? Yes, we are. We're thinking about thinking. Well, for us to be comprehensive and complete and decidable in our thinking, we're going to run into contradiction and paradox. Because of the work of Cantor and Gödel, we know that that's what happens when you have a rational logical system that becomes self-referential. Okay, you run into what Turing called as halting conditions. Okay, yeah, you don't get to be complete and consistent and entirely decidable all when you get into self-reference. So I raised this issue with her, and she said, yeah, I don't think about those sort of things. She's not questioning that authority as a scientist. Note that. So I go to my major professor with this same question, and I do it a little bit. I said, well, I'm just wondering how it applies to real human beings in that way. Okay. And he said to me, well, I know that some of my research is being used to help kids learn and assist people in that way, but I don't really care about those things. I'm just worried about getting grants. And I said, okay. Thank you very much, and thanks for playing the Dave Show. Next contestant. So the idea of understanding myself, even as I seek to understand others, questioning authorities and questioning my questioning of authorities, those all become necessary if I'm focused on understanding humans, people, the real ones, and I'm doing that from a scientific standpoint, and I'm doing it from a theological, spiritual standpoint. Okay, that takes me to a place of having to be pretty thorough in asking those questions. So I kind of wanted to respond to that questioning process in that way.
I think it brings up a very interesting other question is, if we're going to question our thinking, what are some of the ways that people, especially our whole audience here, what are some of the ways that you test your beliefs? In other words, if you're saying, well, I believe this thing, but sometimes you run into contradictions or you run into a wall of your beliefs. Something happens that says, if that thing is true, something else I believe can't be true too. Those two things, I don't see how they can, So how do you test whatever it is you believe? Is that new thing that you experience meaningful and you have to give way to that? Or is the thing that you believe still valid, and that other thing is maybe an anomaly or something that can be explained away in some way? How do you test your beliefs? Anybody?
Are you asking anybody? Asking me? Who do you want to answer first?
Well, I'd like to give these other participants a chance to answer, because I want to keep it as much as possible a conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Good, thank you.
But certainly we want to get your input.
Yeah, great. Let's hear what they have to say.
Yeah, just to jump in, and where my beliefs are tested is unlike Betty. I grew up in a family that argued and debated at every meal, and some of us took just the opposing sides just to be oppositional and to test and see how far it goes. So a family of great debaters. So that is part of the composition of my family, and I get tested every time I go home to visit family at the dinner table, because we keep, we like to push each other's buttons and challenge each other and see what comes of it. But I think experiences, daily, I run into things that are counter to maybe a previous experience or something I've come to feel knowledgeable about. I'll have to come up with a specific way that I process that, because sometimes I pick it up and go with it, but I also welcome that all of us hold contradictions just in our nature. We can hold two contradicting beliefs and function, and just I don't know, and make it work. So I embrace the inconsistency, I guess, and I try to respect that in others as well, that there are just some things that someone's going to believe that might be counter to what we experience together or what we share.
Anyone else?
I think I'm along with Annie on that. I mean, in the way I work, I know there's a ton of things in me that's contradictory. But I think also, like, as an individual, a lot of times what works for me is to kind of realize that, we're always in progress. We're not a static being. Our beliefs don't, or they shouldn't. You can hold a belief strongly, but it is never going to be like, 110% belief. If you proclaim that, you're probably weakening it, even, just trying to make it be who I am. And by allowing those, I just watch, for me, how do you deal with that and competing kind of things in your own life, contradictions or differing beliefs, others, of course, opinions, and listening to them, but also watching for those moments in your life when you have to make decisions that, maybe won't be life altering, but could be, and seeing where you go with it. A lot of times that just tells me a lot more, because you have to make decisions sometimes. You have to move you have to move, you have to get a job, you have to, you have to get married, or you got to get divorced, or there's all these big life decisions, but even in the small decisions, a lot of times you'll see kind of yourself better after the fact, because you have to make a decision. There's a million decisions you have to make. And when you do that, it just kind of allows you to maybe not paint yourself as that's who I am, but understand that belief is, riding high right now. That's part of who you are right now and part of your journey. So that's how I like it. And I like that idea, though, of we're not, 100% this or 100% that, or, it's a constant. There's an internal conversation. And if you're good, to really help you to kind of find your place, a lot of times, it's great to have that external conversation, things like this, but also, like you talked about, going back with family. My family and I, when I was a kid, we would just shout at the top of our lungs, and we loved it. But my dynamic with my current, my nuclear family now is not like that, but we're all very different people still. And so, it allows, it's just kind of the space you find, but to really kind of value those conversations.
While you were talking about contradictions, I was reminded of a Walt Whitman quote. That's pretty well known, so I Googled it. Whitman said, "Do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I am large, I contain multitudes." I like that a lot.
That's awesome. I contain
All
multitude.
of my personalities are arguing all the time. So.
You have to understand the complication of the self and appreciate what's involved here, and hopefully evolve in the process.
Anyone else? How do you test your? Go ahead, Jace, or whoever that was. I thought it was
That was Deb.
Oh, Deb, go ahead, Deb.
Yeah, I had a very simple example of testing beliefs because when I grew up, one of my mother's favorite sayings was, "What will people think?" So it was whatever I wore, well, what will people think or said or did? So I grew up thinking people were always judging me, so that was really hard to really understand who I was. And then it's as you get older and you have this friend circle and you move out into the world a little bit more, you realize, well, Sandra doesn't care if I wear a red sweater or an orange sweater, really doesn't matter. She's not judging me for what I'm wearing, so that's one way of testing your beliefs. Like Dr. Nehring said, you get out into the culture, you get out into religion, you get out anywhere, and that's how you're testing your beliefs. Well, are they real? Are they not? And that's just a really, really simple example, but it just came to mind as we were talking about testing your beliefs. And I just remembered growing up that way. And happy to say I am not thinking people are judging me all the time anymore.
I think the saying goes, we're worried about what people are thinking about us, but they're not thinking about us at all.
That's exactly right. That's what I learned the most, where they're really thinking about themselves more than thinking about me.
Yeah, especially when somebody you even live with doesn't notice that you cut all your hair off, it's just, you just go right past you. They didn't notice anything, or you got new lipstick or something like that. They don't know,
Maybe I'm cutting in,
Sure.
moving ahead, but while we still have time, I'm very interested in hearing David talk about how he came around to being a faith-based counselor. The process of that. And I suppose to the extent that he wants to share with us how he came around to the position of faith and then took it upon himself to counsel others from a faith-based philosophy.
And don't forget to chime in on the testing thing too, David. You were going to offer something on how people test their belief system.
Yeah, well, I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, the tests that you do, and a lot of times we're not aware that we're testing. Okay. It's, I think about the times, when I was in junior high and high school. And whenever I went to a large urban high school, and when there was so many kids there, they couldn't have them all there in one day. So we went to school in shifts. and I remember one of my most stark memories of that time is the Blue River. Okay, this river of denim going down the hallways as class changed. Okay, everybody's wearing denim, right? Okay, so why is everybody wearing denim? Okay, well, because at that stage in your life, you're looking to belong, you're looking to find out who you are, who you're attached to. In other words, you're in the process of being enculturated and becoming part of a culture. Now, we don't think, I'm going to test today how, it's not this intellectual self-conscious thing we might do if we were doing propositional testing. But yeah, when I go to school, and if I in 1978 and I go down school wearing plaid, okay, yeah, those students are going to notice. and that will constitute a test of my experience in that environment. Okay, I don't think of it that way. I don't necessarily think, I have just tested something and got a result, because my purposes in that is I think of it as, I just want to fit in. I want to fit in. Okay, so my purposes are fitting in, and I don't really think of it, that self-awareness, as a test. So there's a lot of things that we're doing, that we're testing, that's conscious, and a lot of things that we're testing that is not conscious. In Annie's house, one of the things I think they probably weren't testing was whether argument by itself broke up relationship. In her house, arguing was consistent with relationship. But I'm thinking there's quite a few families in the North Midwest where arguing ipso facto by itself calls relationship into question. Okay. And so there's certain things we are conscious about testing, and there's certain things that we're not conscious about testing. And a lot of times what's happening between parents and children is children are doing all kinds of testing. Okay. And it's important for the parents to answer those questions that the child is asking in their behavior. And a lot of times the parents will be, and hopefully they're more intentional and thoughtful than just simply reactive. Okay. So I test different things in life with different concerns using these different systems. Okay. Is it a rational, empirical, measurable issue? I'm going to kind of go with science. Is it logic? All right, more philosophy. If I have contradictions going on, are these intrinsic contradictions, or are they just competing ideas? They don't necessarily compete, they don't necessarily contradict, they're just inconsistent. Well, okay, I can sit with that a little bit and kind of do a dialectic. Well, on the one hand, you know, I love the movie Fiddler on the Roof, right? Because in the movie Fiddler on the Roof, we get this snapshot of Jewish culture in the shtetls and the steppes in the early 20th century, and we have this very cool dialectic that Tova, what's the actor's name? Anyway, the character Tev is doing. Every time he's confronted with a proposition by a daughter, I want to marry this guy. Okay. Every time it's presented to her, there is a claim. This should be okay. And every time it comes with an additional understanding. Yeah, he's a little bit farther away from the group. And so Tevyev encounters this with a dialectic. Well, on the one hand, this, but on the other hand, that. But on the other hand, this, and on the other hand, that. And while that's happening, the camera's doing some very interesting things. You know, there's this ultra up close and then far distance, and then ultra up close and then far distance. Okay, what is that? Okay, what that is imminent in my guts and far away transcending abstract. And then I'm dealing with something with else, and all those emotions and feelings, and now I'm seeing her eyeball. Okay, and now I'm actually thinking of it with some perspective, and they're like, you know, 100 yards away. Okay. And so as I'm looking at things dialectically, I'm going deeper. You know, I'm using that Heideggerian concept of thesis, antithesis, and then synthesis. But that process is a process. It might take a couple seconds. Well, do I want a Mars bar, or do I want a banana? You know, or it might take days or decades or a lifetime. And so sitting with these various, point counterpoint is a way of growing in our understanding when you're dealing with things that are competing. Doesn't work quite so well with things that are intrinsically contradictory. Am I going to turn right or left at the stop sign? Okay. I got three choices: right, left, stay. Okay, well, unless I got a road in front of me, well, I can go straight, fine. Okay, I got four choices. But the thing is that each of those choices, those propositions that are going to result in a behavior, are going to be intrinsically contradictory. And as one of I missed his name, said, when I make a choice, I've tested it and decided on something. I'm going ahead with that, and that becomes part of this walk that I'm doing. But there's other things that are paradoxical. And paradoxical things are the hardest things to grab onto, because I'm dealing with questions that are operating at different levels of life, of thinking, of existence. Okay. And, that's when, philosophers run into these paradoxes, and that's when they, philosophers kind of have this reputation of sort of thinking weird. Okay. The weird philosopher, right? This weird, I remember in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, one of these philosophers that they would go, and he would say these things that were just like ludicrous, and then they would go away and then come back to it. Okay. And the reason why it's philosophers are dealing with paradoxical things, they're big questions. And so our processes for dealing with that becomes different than if we're dealing with things that are simply competitive or just simply contradictory.
So, and the child answer.
And those are hypotheticals, David. I'm interested in you being more personal.
Sure,
Where
absolutely.
Where does your faith come from, and how do you sustain it?
Well, there's a faith walk. It's a long story. Okay. A story that I can't tell the whole thing here for a number of different reasons, but I'm going to do some highlights. Okay. So I start out in a Christian home, and in that Christian.
Oops. Might have lost it.
Okay.
You
am I still
dropped
here?
out. You dropped out, David.
Oh, okay. All
You
right.
stayed-
Thank you. Well, let's start again. Okay.
Okay. You started
Yeah,
out in the
yeah.
Christian home.
Yeah. Just notify me if that happens. So, yeah, I started out in a Christian home and a Christian home where we did ask questions, and we questioned faith, we questioned life, we questioned a lot of different things, and had those conversations. The arguments were subtle, not passionate, overt, but they were certainly there. Okay, so that's a Christian home. And then I had my own faith choice experience when I was 14. And that was in a Christian camp where they are presenting ideas about God and about life and about, myself and my personhood and what I valued there. And in that context, I made a choice. And when I made that choice, I understood that there are things that went with that choice. Okay, understandings and actions in life. But it took me a while to kind of unpack what that was. I wasn't one of these folks who sort of like dressed differently the next day or anything of that nature. It was years and years as I'm unpacking that. The next phase in all of that, but I'm now aware that I'm part of this big story with big ideas. And there's this God in which I have a transaction, and it's presented to me in terms of this deal. And I'm offered this deal, and I take this deal. Okay, so I took the deal. Okay, so now I have this deal with God. Not have any really idea what God is, right? Okay, and as part of this, I want to be very clear that there's a difference between a concept of God and God, and not the same thing. Okay, a lot of discussions about God are talking about the concepts of God, and not God. Okay, but the thing is, in order to have the conversation, we have to deal with the concept of God. See, we're kind of stuck. Why? Because we're human. That's what we do. But that's not the same as God. That's the concept of God. So I'm going to draw that distinction, and that's in the background as we're having this conversation. Okay. So I get into college, and I go to a Christian college, and there's all kinds of different ways that I'm seeing students responding to this idea of having a Christian identity. Okay, they're doing it differently. And one of the things is I'm coming from a family that questions, and a lot of those students aren't used to that. And when they start, questioning faith, they're blowing minds all over the place. And while I'm doing this, I'm kind of going, cool, fine, I'm good. Okay. In fact, I'm more in my element. Okay. As a matter of fact, I asked more questions than some of the skeptical professors wanted me to. Okay. I pestered them. Okay. I remember them telling me one day I'd often be that student who would go up and ask questions after every class, right? Okay. I was that kid. Okay. I'd go up and ask questions of the professor. And one day, one of my the particularly skeptical professors kind of blew up at me and said, "Nehring, I don't have time to address more of your conundrums." It's like, okay. And I said, okay, thank you. That's informed consent. Now I know. Okay. You said you wanted me to question. I'm doing the questioning. Yeah, not so much. Okay. Now I know that. So moving along. But the interesting thing is I went through that season of my life, all my peers are doing questionings, and I approached I remember doing things like writing philosophy. I was on the bathroom stalls in the men's bathroom, right? You know, I'm writing, you know, existentialism and things like that there. And I'm looking at existentialism, all that. But the thing I did is I asked the question, I went with the premise that I am not going to set this belief down until somebody proves me wrong. I noticed a lot of my peers is they were going to test that. They're not going to go with it until someone proves them right. Okay. Huh. Okay. Well, I end up in it. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the other students did not consider me a Christian at that time. My wife was warned off about me. Okay. says, yeah, he's not a real Christian. It's like, actually I was, but I don't care. Okay. So I'm going on with this, and I kind of settled on an apologetic where it's like, well, for me to truly respect you, whoever you is, for me to be just, to understand beauty, to understand the good, to understand the loving, it's really important that I not be a tyrant, that I not dictate all of it. And that I recognize that you don't get to dictate all of it either. And so anytime we have the conversation, we have to have definitions, and whoever defines the words wins the argument. So I understand that in order for me to have real value, authentic value, things that's not subject to either one of our idiosyncrasies and exploitation and manipulation, I understand there's a God who is. And I am going to be walking out that relationship, understanding it more as life goes on. So that was sort of the next phase of my life, was sort of the existential understanding of faith, and that it's coming from that place. And I wouldn't call it a leap of faith. I think Kierkegaard's wrong on that, because I also understood that there's something deeper about all this thing. Okay, that's, you know, it's more than that, but that's what I was going to go with. And it's a very intellectual way of doing things. It's very heady and very cognitive. And yeah, I could chop logic with other people and do those sort of things. It's a lot of fun. Okay. And then life started happening. Okay. And so there began to have, you know, parts of this as I'm trying to walk this out. Okay. I'm not necessarily getting understanding by other people sort of within my religious system, and I'm okay with that. That's fine. Okay. What I am going to do is I'm going to understand the means of testing ideas and processing that, and the nature of authority and its limits, and I'm going to operate by that because that's what they say they are operating by. So that's what I did. Okay. And I agree with those. I think that's the basis for that. Part of that same faith, though, is I'm also looking at other religious systems, Buddhism and Islam, and eventually Judaism, and all these different isms, right? You know, Hinduism. And I'm understanding God not as a concept, not as a contract, but a being, okay? And something that's really, really, really transcendent. And one of the things I realized at that time is, in order for me to actually think about God, I'm instantly going to run into halting conditions. I'm going to run into decidability problems. The things that George Cantor talks about, and I think it's Herman Gödel, Hilbert, you know, those people who talk about the axioms of reasoning, it's like, yeah, that if I'm talking about God seriously, it's not just going to be a concept. And now my rational systems are going to run into problems with that. And so I'm going to have to take this axiomatically. And that doesn't bother me. I'm using axiom, not in the sense that it's typically used today, you know, an unexamined premise or just something that I operate. No, I mean a proper axiom, like, okay, 2 points equals a line, okay? Or logic is valid, okay? Or language is meaningful. These are things we have to start out with in order to actually be able to have conversations and thoughts at all, okay? And we can't test those within that system. They're true, okay, but they're not subject to rationality. Now, there are other things that I'm going to take as true that are. And so I have to distinguish between that. So I understood that God was like that, but by analogy, I like to appeal to the idea of two parallel lines never meet, an axiom of geometry. Well, actually, there's some Russians that came up with geometries where two parallel lines meet quite happily. It's an entire rational system. And I understood that the concept of God is analogous to that. That is an axiom that will affect our very reasoning, our very understanding. And it doesn't just do that logically, it does that relationally, it does that politically, it does that on every level of value. It's going to seep into all those different things. Why? Because by analogy to a geometric axiom, it's the basis of the reasoning system itself. And all reasoning systems have that concept. Now I'm talking about the concept thereof. Okay, so now I'm happily going along, diddy-bopping along, saying, yeah, that works out well for me. And then, as I said, life happened, and then things in life don't follow my understanding, not in terms of pain, not in terms of tragedy. I get that. I did not have a problem with that. I have grappled with the problem of evil, really nasty, awful evil. And trust me when I say you in my job, I know quite well about evil. Okay, that isn't anything I'm hiding from. Okay. But there's ways of understanding that it's like, okay, I can grab me. Other people might not like that, but yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay. But just life certain things began to happen in life that I began to understand that, hey, I can't just do this thing intellectually and cognitively. This is actually going to be something that's going to entail much more deeply my person, my emotions, my processes, my relationships. Okay. And, this isn't the time or place to kind of go into those specific things, but trust me when I tell you, this went from a belief to a knowledge that, hey, this is it. Okay. This is that. This occurred. Okay. And there are relationships where I will talk about those specific events in my life when I see that there's a need for the other person and we have that kind of relationship to talk about it. But that's what I call the transcendent moments. There are transcendent moments in life that it's like, okay, if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to have to deal with this. Now, I could explain it away. Yeah, that really wasn't that. It was, and I come up with a story. And fine, you can do that. You can come up with a story. But yeah, for me, because of how I was operating, looking to be consistent, comprehensive, decidable, and have integrity, that wasn't something I was able to do. Okay. And so now what happens is that there is this God thing going on in my life. And then there's these concepts that go along with that. Okay. And the biggest challenge most people have to all of that is the problem of evil. Why do awful things happen in a world where there is a good God who's supposed to have all this power and ability?
Well, I hate to interrupt you, but I
No, this
think
is a good place to stop.
Yeah, this
No, I
is,
love this. This is great. Let's just leave this here. This is good. I like this.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
it's one of those things where I think the clock is going to interrupt us pretty soon.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to not have enough time to thank you sincerely for your input and for making this a very interesting discussion. I would also like to drop something to have our participants think about, and that is, we talked about a belief system, developing our belief system based on the people in our family, our community, our culture, and we talked about our own inner belief systems. And I would like to challenge people to think about where those things kind of like separate. In other words, if we have a belief system that we operate on, can we have a belief system that we operate on internally, but then another one that we use when we have to encounter other people in a mutual public space or a mutual space where all of us have equal weight? how do we negotiate those two belief systems where there's a collective belief system? How do we participate in that? How do we make use of that? We won't get in that. Clearly, we can't get into that now. And maybe this is, we can bring this subject up again, and maybe Dr. Nehring will come back and participate with us once again and give us some insight.
Yeah, if you like. I mean, I love where we've left it today. We leave this giant question. And I agree that your response, your action point, your call to action here is exactly right. Okay. Is how do we look at that within ourselves? And like, how are we going to get along with our neighbors? Because they're coming from different places. So thank you for having me. I appreciate this. It's a lot of fun. I do like to talk. I like to talk about these things. And I hope I was coherent. Never know if I'm going to be. I hope I was.
Well, thank you very much for your participation. And thanks everyone. And we'll see you next week. We're going to be having a very interesting conversation with an author about a murder in a small town. And that should give us a lot of stuff to talk about. And a lot of interesting things should pop up from that. See you next week.